Friday. Hope you are as excited as I am about today being Friday. It's a beautiful day. And I am equally as excited that you all are here to learn about shared living changes. Some significant changes coming up that we wanted everyone to know before implementation date instead of figuring it out later. So some exciting stuff, and I'm hoping that that the new system is going to make things a lot easier for providers and support coordinators. Um, so our agenda today, we're going to talk about urban versus rural. We're going to talk about the pending rate structure, which includes tiers, the rate allocation scores, and daily rates. We're going to do a rate determination form demonstration so you can see how the new rate system is going to work and how easy it is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, once we get approval, what then? And some future planning for enhancement to shared living down the road. So urban versus rural. In our new system, once approved by CMS, urban versus rural will only apply to room and board. So there'll no longer be any differential in the waiver residential service rates for urban versus rural. And the room and board differentiation will only exist until we can reconvene the shared living work group to have a conversation, pull some data, some actual information, and determine what that should be. Because we simply can't guess at what that amount should be. We need actual information to generate a reasonable number. So that's a big win. No more urban versus rural. Uh-oh, someone said they lost me. Kat, can you still hear me?
Yes, you're still on.
Okay. Okay. Scared me. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, that scared me. So, okay. We're good. I'll keep a rolling. Okay. So the pending rate structure has 3 tiers. Those tiers are associated with the rate allocation score. So that's going to make it super simple. The only thing support coordinators and providers are going to need to know is what's the person's rate allocation score and are they urban or rural? And that's all you need to know. And it's going to generate the rate and the code you need to bill for you. So one of the big changes is it is a daily rate now. It is not a budget. There's no line items. It is all encompassing. So the daily rate that the form is going to generate includes all host or companion costs, includes the professional manager, includes the administration cost, and includes the relief costs. Since these are all inclusive in the daily rate, there will be no more variance reporting for shared living providers. That relief is built into that rate, and you work with the host or the companion and the individual, the planning team, to determine how much relief is actually necessary to support the host, companion, and individual. So that's going to be a decision made locally for that individual. The great thing about the change is we're going to be able to gain consistency with how we implement group home and ISL rates, and that we're going to be able to implement the default process for initial shared living budgets. So someone who's coming into shared living for the very first time and does not have a rate allocation score will have a default one. And then when they get a rate allocation score, we'll go back to that first date and we will implement and rebuild the services just like we do for ISL and group home. So it's going to be a great thing to have consistent practices between all 3 services. So we're really excited about that. All right. So this is the shared living tiers and rate allocation rates. So you can see that there's the host home. Sorry, I did not put the procedure code in there. We are working on some things in connection that we're hoping is going to make this even simpler, that we're hoping to have codes that specify the host and the tier. But for right now, we just have the one code for host and one code for companion. So here you can see the host home tier 1 is related to RAS 1, and the daily rate for that is 224.14. Tier 2 is related to RAS 2 and 3 with a daily rate of 247.29. And then Tier 3 is related to RAS 4 and 5 with a daily rate of 331.92. And then you can see the companion follows the same suit. Tier 1 is 1, Tier 2 is 2 and 3, and Tier 3 is 4 and 5. So again, the only thing you need to know is what's the person's RAS and do they live in an urban versus rural setting. So determining the rate, big changes here, and I hope the support coordinators are attending these sessions to hear about the changes firsthand. Providers will no longer submit budgets. There'll be no need for a budget to be submitted. The support coordinators will use a rate determination form, and that's going to tell you exactly what you need to authorize. So there's no need for a budget, just like we don't do a budget for group homes because things are standardized. There's no itemization. So the only caveat is if the person's current daily rate reflected in Seymour is higher than the new structure, then the current daily rate continues. And that's indicated on the rate determination form as well as a reminder. So it remains in place until either a new RAS is completed that then increases the rate within the new structure, or until the enhanced FMAP maintenance of effort ends and we standardize all rates. So again, it's either the rate determination form or the person's current daily rate, whichever is higher. Another key note for everyone, support coordinators and providers, is there will be no more individual waiver budget adjustments, meaning the daily rate you have now or the daily rate determined by the rate determination form, whichever is higher, is the rate you will get, and it will be not modified for individual purposes or for agency administration purposes. That is what it is. So agencies will have to work within that rate to organize and structure their business model to work within that daily rate. You guys are really quiet. I was peppered with questions on the first one. It was bing, bang, boom. So this is a preliminary view of what the shared living rate determination form looks like, but I'm actually going to pull it up for you and I'm going to show you how easy it is. So I'm going to pull that up right now. So, I've already got one pulled down. So all you have to do is no host companion. What is it, host or companion? Is it rate and what is their rate allocation score? And are they urban versus rural? And as a note, the urban counties that are identified are listed down here. So you don't have to reference some other manual or scratch your head and try to figure out what was urban. And so the so you to figure out, is it host, home, or companion? Is it urban versus rural? And you come up here and you pick, let's say, host in their urban, and see it generates a room and board amount here, right? And then you select their RAS, and that generates the amount per month that you're supposed to authorize, and there's the code. So it automatically does that. If I were to select companion and I were to select that, you would see that it moves here to companion and it moves here to companion. Okay. We've also still, also some other reminders. Other is in the current monthly rate reflected in Seymour. So that would be, I mean, you don't have to fill it in. Well, ideally you should, it's a tool. So other is just an indicator, typically, that the current monthly rate in Seymour is higher than what's generated here. A reminder that the minimum of 60 units per year has to be authorized to the residential RN using this code. And a reminder that host and companion transportation is included in the daily rate and not authorized in addition to the shared living code for the host or companion. And then there's just a breakdown of the daily rate for people to reference. But the only thing you have to do is select companion or host, And are they urban and rural? And what is the person's rate allocation score? So I've gotten a couple of questions. So I'm going to go back up before I go any further and see what I can answer. And I think some of these I have already answered. So someone asked, curious about the rate based on support staff, $15 an hour. So in a host or companion home, they're not paid for sleep time by Department of Labor rule. So this is based on the Mercer rate study. This was not an ambiguous rate that we just came up with. So Mercer did take that into account. And each level is predicated on a number of hours of support that the person should, could need. So that's how that was brought apart. Someone asked who completes the rate determination form. It is the case manager. As you can see on the form, there's no signature. There's no signature. There's no identifying information. So you have an ISP, a support career has an ISP due. They pull it up and they pop in these 2 line items and it tells them what they need to authorize unless Seymour is higher than this budget. How do SCs find the RAS rate? Almost all are all but 400 and I want to say 47, somewhere around there. RAS scores are in Seymour now. So if you attended yesterday's provider meeting, there was a slide that gave a screenshot of how to find that. But you go to the individual in Seymour, you go to their identifiers where you can find the person's DMH ID, where you find their waiver slot number. And in that you will see MAS ROS and CIS ROS. So everyone should, everyone who has had a MAS since July 1 of 2021 will have a MAS recorded. So what we did was we uploaded all of the historical SIS from the last support intensity scale that was provided, and that is now represented there for reference. Some people might only have a CIS ROS because they haven't had a MAS yet, and some people might only have a MAS ROS because they were new to placement. So it should have the most current RAS in the system and the last one known if they had one. Except for those 400 people that for some reason didn't pull into our report and we're going to have to manually go in. But that's a lot better than that. 400 people I'll take. That's a lot better than everyone being done manually. So we're excited about that being in there too. That's great timing for this. When will this start? It will start as soon as once we have CMS approval. We will retro this back to July 1 of 2022. And we're going to talk about how we're going to do that. But what you need to know is once we have CMS approval and we say this starts today, your next ISP, your next plan amendment, you're going to pull up this form and use this form. Okay. Yes, COLAs will affect the rate if they're allocated. The RN service right now is still billed separately to the T2002, or sorry, T1002 without a modifier. Can you drop the link to the site with forms? The forms are not posted yet because you can't implement the forms until we have CMS approval. So once we have CMS approval, they will be posted. This PowerPoint and the recording and the Q&A will be posted to our division website once we're done and once it's cleaned up, it'll be posted. Currently, the companion room and board is sometimes higher if they can afford that. How will that be accounted for? It's the same way. You'll notice under room and board, there's an other. So if what they're, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. So if their current rate is higher than what this generates, they get to keep that, that rate. So again, that would fall under this other category. Current monthly rate is higher than the generated form, they get to keep it. How do you know urban versus rural? Urban is listed here. So only these counties are classified as urban. Everything else is rural. Okay. If the consumer moves and they remain the same category, urban or rural, does a new shared living rate determination form need to be submitted to UR? Um, I'm trying to read the whole thing. No, the form doesn't need to be submitted again when someone moves, unless there's a change, right? Unless movement means a change. And again, this form doesn't have any identifiers on it. It doesn't have anybody's name. So this is not a budget. This is just how you figure out what the rate is. Okay. Can rate be adjusted year to year, or are you saying whatever it is now will be the final rate? Rates are always adjustable year to year. So this is the rate that we will implement in fiscal year 23 once CMS approves. Um, and so it will, we could get a COLA next year. We're also doing the rate study refresh that could generate different or increased rates than what we have here. So every year could potentially change. And all rates, every rate, every service is dependent on budget allocation from our legislature, from our state budget. So rates could change every year based on a myriad of reasons. Um, Someone asked again, when is the change effective? As soon as CMS approves it, and we will retro it back to 7/1, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. How will we request additional RN units for the Hearst? Um, the same way you do for ISL and group home now. There is an expedited form that you submit to UR asking for additional RN units for Hearst. That has no impact on how you authorize shared living service. That is to the separate code of the T1002. Will providers get a copy of the rate determination form? Um, the rate determination form will be posted for everyone to see, and you could and you could um go, you can ideally at your planning meeting, you and the support coordinator would sit down and look at this and do it together. Ideally, a provider will want to double check to make sure that, it's a drop down box. So perhaps they click the box incorrectly. So you'll want to double check. So I would work together that ISP time is a prompt time to do that. Um, and yet providers do need to provide justification on additional nursing hours, whether that's for Hearst or some other reason. Justification in writing, that's between you and the support coordinator. Ultimately, justification in writing does have to go to UR for additional hours, which cause an increase to the budget. If the individual's rate is higher than the rate for host or companion, can you show how the form is completed? You don't need to complete the form. If the rate is higher in Seymour, you simply reauthorize the rate that is in Seymour. Again, there's no name, there's no identifiers on this form. This is just helping you figure out what rate to use. So if you wanted to see it in black and white, and let's say this was a host urban one, you could use it to help yourself. Okay, I'm gonna look in Seymour, and that their room and board is $600. Okay, I'm gonna use the $600 because it's higher. Their Seymour amount is currently 5,800. Okay, I'm gonna use the new dollar amount because the Seymour amount is lower. So you could use it as a tool, but you don't have to fill this out if Seymour is higher than this. Or you don't have to fill out any information. Okay. So, what is the process once the service coordinator determines the rate? Does it go through UR? Have to wait for approval and authorization input? If the person's already in shared living, there's no change. Nothing goes through UR. The rate change is something that we will manage at the division, and we'll talk about that here in a slide. The only time a plan has to go through UR is if there's an increase not due to a budgetary rate structure change. So asking for more units of service, asking for an increased dollar for transportation, asking for, those kinds of things. But when we change rates due to COLAs or due to receiving a budget line item so that we can increase rates, those don't go back through UR because those are systemic issues that we handle. Um, so, so you should see that relatively quickly, and we'll talk about that here in a minute on next steps once approved. What is the process once the service coordinator determines the rate? Oh, that's the same question I just read. Thank you. Okay. That's the same question. The forms will be submitted annually, or if the person moves. So you would want to reevaluate anytime someone, if they move from one county to another. Did they change from a host or an urban to a rural county? Do you need to change that budget? Did they change from a host to a companion? So yeah, but the forms, again, these forms are tools. So if I would complete them annually to make sure that I was authorizing it correctly. Just double checking myself, double checking, against what's in Seymour. Will there be a way to track these forms being completed on time by case managers to assure that is to assure providers can bill in a timely manner? That's all based on the ISP. So whether they get the ISP done timely, and there are ways to pull reports about ISPs being recorded timely, that we're watching and sharing, and that is improving. But the form itself being completed doesn't generate anything. The support coordinator has to complete an authorization, just like they would for a group home or an ISL. You can provider submits an ISL budget. It's still dependent on the support coordinator completing the ISP and authorization. So that's what we'll be measuring is the ISP and authorization updated. Let's see. There again, it's not a budget. Someone asked, will we get a copy once authorized? It's not a budget. There's no person's name up here. There's no signature on here. This is just a rate determination form. And if you work together, if you do it at the ISP together and double check it, then it should be right. So it's my understanding from previous conversations that if the current rate is higher, it goes into Seymour for only 1 year. And after that year, it goes back to the new tiers. We can't decrease to the tiers until our enhanced or effort of maintenance for the FMAP ends. I can't remember when that date is, but a year sounds about right. But rates cannot be reduced, cannot be standardized until the enhanced FMAP maintenance of effort is ended. Whether that's a year or 2 years and by then we'll have a new rate study. And so maybe there won't be as big of an impact. Will there be checks and balances to ensure the correct rates are put into Seymour? Support coordinators and providers should work together. Support coordinator should authorize it. Provider gets a copy of a plan. Provider can see the authorization. Provider bills the authorization. So should be, balancing, checking against that ISP authorization and checking when you're billing to make sure it's right. But if you work together at the ISP, then this should be right. And all providers should be reviewing their authorizations before billing, because there's all kinds of wonky stuff that happens that that authorization may not be correct to the best of everyone's effort. Will we automatically adjust the rate if a new MOSROS is completed and the score changes the rate, similar to the ISL clients? That will be our plan. That is our plan. And they are adjusted actually by the Provider Relations Enrollment and Rate Team now for ISL and group home, and they would be adjusting these. But yes, it will follow the same process as ISL and group home. And won't that be awesome? So no more trying to remember which one does what. Will staffing patterns be needed? No, not for host home and companion. Those are not predicated on staffing patterns. Someone asked if the forms do not have identifiers and are not going through URs or anyone checking to ensure authorizations are correct. I think I already answered that. The support grant provider should be working together, should be verifying, and the provider needs to check their authorizations when they bill to make sure that they are correct. To be clear, this form is not required to be submitted to the individual's record or to the provider for their records, as it is just a calculating tool. Correct. Yes, correct. If a support coordinator fills this out and I fill this out, if we should have the exact same answer. There should be no differential. If you know whether they're a host or a companion, and whether they're urban or rural, and what their RAS is, that's the answer. I could see some confusion, and this is where I would say I really encourage people to do this together at the ISP, double check the information, make sure it's right, because remember right now we are we are honoring the hire of the current RAS or the previous RAS. I could see there being some accidents of people using the current RAS when the previous one was higher. So I could see that happening. That would be super easy, right? Because you're going to want to use the most recent RAS in Seymour. But remember that we're honoring the higher of the two. So I could see that being a legitimate mistake that people could make. So that's why it's important for you guys to work together to do this and to double check your authorizations. Someone said, when will room and board rates be reevaluated? If we can get them reevaluated and we can come to a solution before CMS gives us approval, we'll be able to get rid of urban versus rural at the same time we implement this budget structure. Honestly, I just need to schedule time with all shared living providers to go through. I've been thinking about how to do that, thinking about should we collect data first or should we have a meeting first? And so that's kind of my hang up. But I do intend to invite shared living providers a few different dates in September, because the sooner we can, I think it won't take us that long to come up with a rate for room and board that's consistent across urban versus rural. We just have to do some data pools. So I'm hoping to have it done pretty quickly. I know that the committee wants and needs to address some other issues, but if we can come together in September and just focus on room and board, get that nailed out, we can get that run out really quickly. Thank you. You guys make me feel better. You asked questions. I was beginning to worry about you. So, all right. So, okay, let's see. So we were talking, I said we were talking a little bit about what happens next, what happens when we get approval. So when CMS approves, we're going to take this all the way back to July 1 of 2022. Right? We had to do this last year, and it's a little crazy. So we'll take it all the way back to July 1 of 22, and we will and those services will be rebilled back to July of 2022. So it could take a little while for rebilling to happen, but the update to the rates won't. We have a listing of all shared living authorizations, and we have already figured out their rate allocation score and are they host or companion, and we were already ready to run that report as soon as we get approval. Again, it won't impact people whose current daily rates are higher than the new rate structure. So once we get the approval and that's uploaded, we'll send PR will send providers their list of people receiving shared living services so they can go through it and verify. And if they find any errors, we'll go back into the system and we'll correct those. So this is kind of how we handled, similar to how we handled last year when we got approval for rates, didn't get approval for rates on the first of the year. And so we had to implement changes later on. Some future enhancement planning that we've got going on, just so you're aware, and hopefully this won't confuse anyone, but future enhancement ideas. We are working on a modifier for the shared living RN oversight. Um, Similar to we have a specific modifier for ISL, a specific modifier for group home that really caused the problem last year because the rates were different. And this year it's going to be different, but it's going to have the reverse effect because this year the PAMS RN is going to be higher than the ISL and group home RN. Um, and that's because PAMS has administrative costs and things built into it because they're not attached to a residential service. Um, so it's a little, and those are almost always um, employees versus contractors. So, so that's a plan. We want to get the shared living consistent as possible with ISO and group home, have its own modifier and have a consistent rate. And again, I mentioned earlier, we're hoping that this rate determination form is temporary. It's a temporary thing because we're in connection, we're building post home RAS 1, post home RAS 2, where you're just gonna select that and it's gonna you generate it. So similar to how when you're authorizing group home, you authorize U1 for RAS1, U2 for RAS2. We're trying to build the same thing in the connection platform. So this termination form is just bridging that gap until we can get to an enhanced system. And someone asked if there's any reason to think CMS won't approve. We really don't think there's any reason that, I mean, we're really, really confident. One, we have state approval. Two, we're using enhanced federal funds. Three, CMS wants us to be consistent in our rate methodology, and everything we're doing this year is moving towards that goal. So they could have questions about how did you come up with that rate, which we have answers for because we use the Mercer rate study. But we're like have like every finger crossed on our hand, but we're pretty confident. It's just taking a little while because a lot of states received enhanced FMAP, and so everyone is amending their waivers and submitting to CMS, and it's the same team of people reviewing all of those. So they kind of been flooded right now with requests. So that's why it's taken a little bit. We were just really happy that we didn't have to have approval for ones when that we didn't have to have approval for ones that already had a consistent rate structure, like the ISL and group home. We already had a consistent rate methodology. But unfortunately for shared living, we did not. We have to update the waiver to reflect the new methodology. Someone asked, until the system is approved, do providers still submit budgets and current rate determination forms? Yes, ma'am. Until we tell you that that CMS has approved the new structure, continue to submit what is currently posted on the website for to support queries for authorization. So for ISPs, when in person, we often don't have our computers or access to internet. Should we then schedule a meeting with the provider, do this over video? Can we print and take with us to the meeting? Various ways. You could fill this form out, print it, and take it with you. You could email it to the provider and say, hey, this is what I got. Is this what you got? You could do a call and walk through it together. You know, the I was trying to think if there's some way, since the daily rates are here, you could take this with you, and if you and you all could say, oh, it's a host and it's a tier 2, and you could, since you're in person, you could just circle that, and you could say, you could use it as a tool. You could talk it through. Okay, it's a host, it's a 2, and it's going to be a host urban. And so that way, when you get back, you can do it electronically and drop, okay, this says host urban, and we said it was a 2, you know. So there's a lot of different ways that you could use this tool electronically, over the phone, by video, in person, whatever is going to meet your needs. And we just wanted to simplify it as much as possible. And budgets are great, but budgets route to 4 different places and take time in getting authorizations into the system. So we were trying to find the most efficient way for support coordinators to quickly get authorizations in the system, and no one's waiting on a budget or a document from someone else to make it happen. Okay. Yes, support grants should continue using the shared living budget submitted by providers until this is approved. Yes. So, all right. I know your invite did say 9 to 9:30, but we did extend this until 9:45, just to make sure you guys had opportunity to ask any questions. We didn't want you to feel rushed. Want to give you a few moments to think of anything that you didn't ask already. Um, so, all right. Once approved, will the rates be updated for the SC, or does the SC go back and make the adjustments? Um, so we have a report ready to go, and we will be making the rate adjustments. So unfortunately, you know that anytime you're working off of a report, just like our RAS report, there things are going to go wrong. So we'll do our best. We're going to update the rates in Seymour, provide the provider with a list of their people in the RAS that we entered. And then they'll help us find any errors. But we also please support coordinators if you find errors when you're out there. Hey, this one doesn't look like it got adjusted. Just shout out and we'll get it fixed. But you do not have to make adjustments because this was going to go back to July 1. We'll try to get the rates fixed. Like say we get approval September, we'll get them fixed. So from October forward, the rate's right and providers billing correctly. And then we'll work on going back to July and because we're going to have to do a lot of rebilling. If you find errors, who do you notify? Well, providers, when you get your list, you'll be working with PR. You'll be feeding back to PR if you find errors, and we'll work with the business office lead who ran the report to get it corrected. So when we send that report out with the listing of the people that you serve in their RAS, you'll get instructions then. Yeah, because if any of you are also doing transportation services, standalone transportation, there'll be a whole project with that too when we get approval. So, all right. I will hang out here until 9:45 in case anyone has any more questions. Um, uh, and someone asked a question, then I forgot I do have one more slide. What if there is an error after initial transition? We can go back and fix it. Um, C, being that the rate is now all-inclusive and will be up to providers to determine host home rates, which may vary, will there be training with case managers on how to communicate with hosts regarding rates? Case managers will not be aware of how providers break down the rates and could inadvertently share the total rate with hosts, giving the impression they should be receiving the full daily rate when that's not going to be the case. We've seen this happen with current budgets, trying to make sure I don't lose my place. And with this new structure, can see this being a potential problem. So I will tell you what I tell support, or what I have hosts call me. We have hosts call provider relations now. Um, Currently what's on the budget it does not necessarily transfer entirely to the host. There's a lot of factors as to what transfers to the host. Even when you look at the current budget, the provider has to determine whether they may be treating that host as an employee. Which means they have to take pieces of that out to pay for benefits, to pay for insurances and different things. They might be treating them as a contractor and then they don't. So when I have employees of providers call me and ask if they're being paid correctly, I do not answer them. I refer them back to their employer. It is not within my purview, my responsibility to answer that question. It's their employer's responsibility to answer that question. So I would advise support coordinators that if you're asked by a host or a companion about the budget, because if they should have a copy of the ISP, so they're going to see the authorization. You simply need to provide the answer. The daily rate or the monthly rate is all inclusive of all costs, including relief, professional manager, and um, quality assurance and administrative costs associated with the service. If you're concerned about how much you're receiving, you need to talk to your employer, okay, or administering agency. You don't know, support coordinators don't know all of the ins and outs of what a provider is paying, why or why not, and whether they're an employee or a contractor, neither do I. So I do not answer those questions, and support coordinators shouldn't either. That is between the employee and their employer or administering agency. Hopefully that helps. Will it be training for case managers? If case managers come to one of three options of training, then they'll be informed and they'll know. If they don't come, then this will be out there and recorded for them to reference. But I am one person and I can't track down over 2,000 people to train them individually, which is why we had this at 3 different times. So to try to fit into people's schedule. So hopefully, I can tell you that as of today with this session, I think we've trained about 200 people roughly between the 2 sessions. So obviously we're not reaching every provider staff and every support coordinator at this point. So all we can do is beam out when the recording is available for people to go out and train. And then we'll, train the tax so the tax can do technical assistance as well. Just wanted to remind people it's a low, it is a little bit of confusion that in order to provide out-of-home respite, the provider must be certified for out-of-home respite. It's out-of-home respite is now a certified service. So if the provider has shared living on their contract and they want to do out-of-home respite at locations where there is no authorization for host homes, means there's no authorization. Doesn't mean the person's on vacation or home for the weekend. There's no authorizations for host home services. That shared living provider has to obtain certification specifically for out-of-home respite before they can do it. So providers who are group homes doing out-of-home respite, they're grandfathered in. They were already doing that, but when their next certification visit comes, then they will be also certified for out-of-home respite. Can you verify that the provider works with the host provider to determine how many relief hours are necessary and what the providers will pass through the host? Yes. Most providers have contracts with their hosts, and that lines out, or agreements, and that lines out what, everything that's going to be done. But those mechanisms really are between the administering agency and their contractor or employee. There's too many variables. Transportation for the host and companion is included in the daily rate. The host does not get, or companion does not get additional miles for taking someone into the community or to visit their mom or to go grocery shopping. All right. We will get this posted and send out when it is available. So please be looking for that. Please encourage anyone that you know who has not attended a session to come to the next one. And if they can't make it, please encourage them to review the recording. These are substantial changes and really good ones. But support coordinators and providers, everyone needs to understand the changes. So please encourage people to come. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was super helpful, and we'll continue to look for ways to make this easier and more efficient. Okay?